Everyone's talking about Princess Eugenie cutting off her father. The headlines have been running for months now. Eugenie finally takes a stand. Daughters distance themselves from disgraced Duke. And yes, Prince Andrew is finished. We all know that. His Newsnight interview in November 2019, the Pizza Express alibi, the photograph with Virginia Giuffre he couldn't explain, the £12 million settlement in February 2022 that came with no admission of liability, but stripped him of his military affiliations and his right to call himself His Royal Highness. That story is done. But here's what nobody's asking. Why is Sarah Ferguson sliding quietly out of frame at the exact moment the world is looking for villains? Why is Eugenie's mother, the woman who took £15,000 directly from Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction was public record, the woman caught up in a cash for access scandal in 2010, somehow positioning herself as a victim rather than a participant? This isn't another video about Andrew being terrible. You already know that. What you don't know, what the media has refused to examine, is the ignored co-villain who's escaping accountability while her ex-husband absorbs all the public rage. And Eugenie? She's not just distancing herself from her father. The evidence suggests she's building a wall around her children that keeps out both grandparents, because she understands something the rest of us are only beginning to piece together. Let's establish the obvious first, quickly. Prince Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein persisted even after Epstein's 2008 conviction in Florida for procuring a minor for prostitution. That conviction was public record, widely reported, impossible to miss for anyone paying attention. The photograph of Andrew with his arm around 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre at Ghislaine Maxwell's London townhouse in 2001 became one of the most scrutinized images in royal history. Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit in August 2021 accusing Andrew of sexual abuse. The case settled out of court in February 2022 for approximately £12 million. No admission of liability, but also no military honors left, no His Royal Highness, no public role whatsoever. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in December 2021 on 5 federal charges related to sex trafficking. She's currently serving 20 years. That's the baseline. The audience treats Andrew's guilt as established fact, and they're right to. But here's what should bother you. Andrew didn't operate in isolation. Someone else was in the room. Someone else knew. Someone else benefited. And that someone has been hiding in plain sight. To understand why Sarah Ferguson took money from Jeffrey Epstein, you first need to understand what happened in 2010. Sarah Ferguson was caught up in a cash for access scandal that made international headlines. She was filmed offering to arrange introductions to Prince Andrew to facilitate access to a senior member of the British royal family in exchange for money. The footage aired. The scandal erupted. Sarah Ferguson released a statement apologizing. She called it a terrible lapse in judgment. And then, remarkably, the story faded. Within months, the British media had moved on to other scandals, other royals, other outrages. But here's what that scandal revealed. By 2010, Sarah Ferguson was financially desperate. She had mounting debts. She had a lifestyle that required constant funding. And she had exactly one asset she could monetize, her continued relationship with Andrew. This is the context for what happened next. Sarah Ferguson accepted £15,000 from Jeffrey Epstein in approximately 2010 or 2011. Let that timeline sink in for a moment. This was around the same time she was caught up in the cash for access scandal. She needed money, badly. And into that desperation stepped Jeffrey Epstein, a man who by this point had already served 13 months in a Florida county jail for procuring a minor for prostitution. His crimes were a matter of public record. The world knew exactly what he was, and Sarah Ferguson took his money anyway. Prince Andrew arranged the payment. He served as the intermediary between his ex-wife and the convicted sex offender. When this became public in March 2011, Ferguson gave an interview to the Evening Standard. Her exact words? "I abhor pedophilia and any sexual abuse of children, and know that this was a gigantic error of judgment on my behalf. I am just so contrite I cannot say. Whenever I can, I will repay the money and have nothing ever to do with Jeffrey Epstein ever again." Nothing ever to do with Jeffrey Epstein ever again. That phrase has haunted her for 14 years. Because the Epstein flight logs came out. The seized documents emerged. The testimony of witnesses painted a picture of a social network that extended far beyond what anyone initially acknowledged. And Sarah Ferguson's role in that network, however peripheral, remained unexplored while all the cameras pointed at Andrew. Here's what cannot be disputed. She maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein that was deeper than she initially acknowledged. She took money from a man she knew to be a convicted sex offender. She benefited from whatever access and arrangements flowed through Andrew's Epstein connection for years. And when the walls started closing in, she positioned herself as a victim of circumstance rather than a willing participant in something profoundly troubling. The consequences for Sarah have been staggeringly limited compared to Andrew. He was stripped of everything. She kept her title as Duchess of York. She continued her charity work. She published children's books. She appeared on television programs. She maintained a public presence that would be absolutely impossible for someone who had faced real accountability. This asymmetry, one half of a partnership destroyed while the other skates free, is what drives people insane when they think about this case. And they're right to be angry about it, but the financial connection is only part of the prosecution. On January 13, 2015, with allegations against Andrew already circulating in court documents filed in Florida, Sarah Ferguson appeared on American television to defend him. She called the accusations shockingly accusatory allegations. She positioned herself firmly, publicly, in Andrew's corner. This wasn't a woman distancing herself from a troubled ex-husband. This was active protection, a coordinated defense, and she kept doing it, year after year. Even as more survivors came forward, even as the evidence mounted, even as Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in July 2020, even after Maxwell's conviction in December 2021, a conviction that implicated the entire Epstein circle, Sarah Ferguson remained publicly loyal to Andrew. When pressed on her continued defense, she offered occasional statements acknowledging sympathy for survivors, but always balanced against expressions of support for her ex-husband. The message was clear. She would stand with Andrew, no matter what. Here's the question nobody wants to ask. What kind of mother remains publicly aligned with a man credibly accused of sexual misconduct with trafficking victims, when that alignment forces her own daughters to navigate the fallout? Eugenie and Beatrice didn't choose to be Andrew's daughters. They didn't choose to have their weddings overshadowed by their father's scandals. They didn't choose to spend their adult lives answering for his behavior, while their mother stood beside him offering cover. But Sarah Ferguson did choose. Again, and again, and again. She chose to stand publicly with Andrew over whatever might have been in the best interests of her children's reputations, their peace of mind, their futures. And now, reports suggest Eugenie may be choosing to stand with her own children over both of her parents. So why has the media protected Sarah Ferguson? Look at the coverage volume. Type Prince Andrew Epstein into any search engine, and you'll drown in results. Type Sarah Ferguson Epstein, and the pickings are remarkably thin. The few stories that exist treat her Epstein connection as a footnote, a mistake she apologized for, a chapter that's closed. But it's not closed. The Epstein Web Tracker, a database that maps connections to Epstein across public figures, offers a careful assessment of Ferguson's situation. There is no evidence in the public record that she has been charged with any crime relating to Epstein's sex trafficking operation. The available documentation shows that Sarah Ferguson had social and financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein that were deeper than once acknowledged, but does not show that she was part of his abuse network. Still, the documentation exists. The receipts are there. The difference is that Andrew makes a better villain. He's royal by blood. He's male. He has that entitled demeanor that people love to hate. Sarah Ferguson, meanwhile, has spent decades cultivating a Fergie persona, the relatable outsider, the woman wronged by the stuffy palace, the scrappy survivor who clawed her way back from bankruptcy and scandal. That narrative is useful to the media. Sympathetic, sellable. What's not useful, what nobody wants to touch, is the reality that she was in the room, that she knew what Andrew was doing, that she benefited from those connections while they lasted and walked away clean when they imploded. The media has decided who the villain is, and it's not Sarah. Now, let's talk about who Eugenie is actually protecting. August Philip Hawke Brooksbank was born on February 9, 2021, at Portland Hospital in London. His middle name, Philip, honors Eugenie's grandfather, the Duke of Edinburgh, who died just 2 months later in April 2021. Ernest George Ronnie Brooksbank arrived on May 30, 2023. He's named in tribute to family members, including connections to King George V. August is 3. Ernest is 1. They have no idea what the word Epstein means. They don't know why certain family gatherings might be complicated. They don't understand why Mummy and Daddy chose to live so far away from Grandma and Grandpa's big house. And Eugenie appears determined to keep it that way. The move to Portugal wasn't just about distance. It was about building a life that doesn't depend on royal proximity. The family lived at Frogmore Cottage, sublet from Prince Harry and Meghan after they left for California, until 2022. Then they relocated. They now maintain a home in Comporta, a coastal town about 90 minutes south of Lisbon, splitting time with a residence at Ivy Cottage in Kensington Palace when they're in London. But Portugal is the primary base now. That's where the boys are growing up. Jack Brooksbank works in international business and hospitality. His career path has taken him far from the traditional royal orbit. He's worked with brands like Casamigos Tequila and has connections to the luxury resort industry. Portugal offers something London cannot: the ability to build a professional life and raise a family without every school pickup, every grocery run, every doctor's appointment becoming a potential tabloid story about whether Eugenie is speaking to her parents. Comporta itself is deliberate. It's a beach town. Quiet, international, with a community of expatriates and wealthy Europeans who have summer homes there. The kind of place where people value privacy because they're seeking it themselves. Not the kind of place where paparazzi stake out restaurants hoping to catch a disgraced royal. That's not a commute away from Royal Lodge. That's a different country, a different life. A deliberate, physical, financial barrier between her children and the chaos that shaped her own childhood. And here's where this story becomes devastating. What did Eugenie grow up with? What was she exposed to that she's now refusing to repeat with her own children? The documented record offers substantial evidence of a childhood marked by public scandal and parental chaos. Andrew and Sarah's divorce was finalized in 1996, but they maintained an unusual living arrangement afterward. They continued sharing residences. They presented a united front for their daughters while pursuing separate romantic lives. This unconventional setup meant Eugenie and Beatrice grew up in a household where normal family boundaries were constantly blurred, where their mother's exile from royal favor was ever present, where both parents' financial struggles and questionable associations were recurring features of the tabloid landscape. Their adolescence unfolded against a backdrop of their mother's repeated financial controversies, including the 2010 Cash for Access scandal. Their father's business dealings and friendships were subjects of persistent media inquiry. The girls were photographed, scrutinized, and commented upon from childhood. Their appearance, their weight, their fashion choices, their boyfriends. Everything became fodder for public consumption. There was nowhere to hide, no private childhood, no moment of normalcy that couldn't be interrupted by a photographer or a tabloid headline, or a new revelation about what their parents had done. Andrew's association with Epstein meant that during Eugenie's childhood and adolescence, she would have been present at various family gatherings and residences. Whether she ever encountered Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, whether she witnessed anything troubling, whether she simply absorbed the awareness that something was off about some of Daddy's friends, only Eugenie knows. But we can observe what she's doing now. The geographic separation, the establishment of a primary home in another country, the creation of a family unit that operates outside the traditional royal orbit, the career path that doesn't depend on family money or connections. These are not the actions of a daughter content with how she was raised. These are the actions of someone who has concluded that proximity itself carries risks she refuses to impose on her children. She's doing for August and Ernest what her parents never did for her and Beatrice, breaking the cycle. Finally. Now. Some of you are already typing in the comments, "She's just now doing this? Now the money has dried out?" Fair question. Let's address it. The timeline matters. Before Andrew's Newsnight disaster in November 2019, Eugenie maintained regular public appearances with her father. The family presented a united front despite mounting questions. Her wedding to Jack in October 2018 at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, just 1 year before the interview, showed no sign of the rupture to come. After the interview, universally recognized as catastrophic from the moment it aired, the gradual distancing began. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, measurably. The public appearances together became less frequent. The geographic choices started pointing away from London. But here's what the cynics point to. Reports suggest the financial support that once flowed through the family may no longer be flowing as it once did. And suddenly, Eugenie's distance looks less like moral courage and more like calculated self-preservation. Why associate with the scandal when there's nothing left to gain from it? The believers, about 30% of you based on the comments I've read, want this to be genuine. You want Eugenie to be the daughter who finally said enough, who looked at her baby boys and decided they deserved better than the childhood she had, who's willing to lose both parents if that's what protecting her family requires. The cynics, a solid 50%, think this is pure PR, a strategic repositioning, a way to maintain some connection to royal relevance without the Andrew stain. They point out that Eugenie has never made a public statement condemning her father, never explicitly called out her mother's Epstein connections. The silence is calculated, they argue. She wants the distance without the confrontation, the moral credit without the family rupture. Both interpretations have evidence supporting them, and honestly, the truth is probably somewhere in between, and messier than either camp wants to admit. Some of you don't believe this story is even real. In November 2024, People magazine reported that Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie were actually spending more time with Prince Andrew, directly contradicting the estrangement narrative. The Daily Mail photographed Andrew on a shooting trip with Eugenie and Jack Brooksbank that same month. If she's cut him off, why was she standing next to him holding a shotgun in the English countryside? Royal family dynamics are notoriously opaque. Sources close to members of the family are often unreliable, sometimes contradictory, and occasionally planted to serve specific PR objectives. The skeptics who think this whole estrangement storyline is media fabrication have legitimate grounds for doubt. But even the skeptics have to grapple with Portugal, with the deliberate geographic choices, with the fact that Eugenie has built a life that doesn't require proximity to either parent's world. You don't move your children to another country because you want to have Sunday dinners at Royal Lodge. Something has changed. The extent of that change, the permanence of it, the motivations behind it, that's where reasonable people can disagree. But the distance is real. Here's what we know for certain. Eugenie cannot publicly denounce her father without causing a complete family rupture. She cannot publicly defend him without associating herself and her children with his disgrace. She cannot discuss her mother's Epstein connections without opening wounds the family has worked desperately to keep closed. The geographic distance may be the only form of statement available to her. A quiet withdrawal that speaks volumes without requiring words anyone could use against her. And that distance, whether it's about moral courage or survival instinct or both, extends beyond Andrew. It extends to Sarah. To the mother who took Epstein's money and defended Andrew on television and somehow escaped accountability while her daughters dealt with the consequences. To the woman who was caught up in a cash-for-access scandal when her daughters were teenagers. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Sarah Ferguson prioritized her own financial desperation over her daughter's well-being. She chose money from a convicted sex offender. She chose public loyalty to a man credibly accused of abuse. She chose, repeatedly, her own survival over her children's peace. And now, Eugenie is making different choices. She's choosing protection over proximity, safety over scandal, her children's innocence over her parents' egos. She's refusing to let August and Ernest grow up the way she did, surrounded by chaos, exposed to scandal, forever answering for their parents' and grandparents' decisions. Whether that makes her brave or strategic, maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the most honest thing anyone can do in a situation this impossible is simply leave. Move to Portugal. Build a life far from Royal Lodge and the cameras and the questions. Let the silence speak for itself, because sometimes the loudest statement is the one you never make. And sometimes the best thing a mother can do is make sure her children never have to learn what the word Epstein means from a tabloid headline, never have to explain their grandmother's financial desperation, never have to carry the weight that Eugenie has carried since childhood, when her parents' humiliations became the whole world's entertainment. The cycle ends somewhere. Maybe it ends in a beach town in Portugal, where two little boys can play in the sand without knowing why their grandfather isn't invited. Subscribe for more stories like this.